Hey guys, Tom here again from synthhacker.com and welcome back to another tutorial for Massive. In this tutorial we're going to be looking at making this cinematic style string preset. A really nice sound. Obviously can be used in a lot of different genres. I'm thinking, like mainly trance, but obviously any kind of track with a breakdown that you want to sound like super epic and cinematic, this would be really great for. Also like stuff like variants, stuff on Montscat as well. And yeah, really cool patch. We're gonna go ahead and initialize the patch. Obviously we're gonna be making it completely from scratch. And yeah, before we get into it guys, as always, go ahead and check out my website over at synthhacker.com if you get the time after this video, or you can click the link in the description below, of course, and go check out my presets for Native Instruments Massive. Definitely useful to obviously use in your productions and also reverse engineer as well. So like I said, that's over at synthhacker.com, or you can click the link in the description below. But without further ado, let's begin making this sound completely from scratch. So a sensible place to start would be in the voicing tab. Now there's a couple of things to mention. First of all, this sounds best when you absolutely max out the amount of voices. We've got 7 voices of unison and then loads of different notes playing at any one time. So if you only set this to like 32 or 16 or something like that, you're not getting the full amount of voices. It's not going to sound as big and as thick and epic. Now this is a problem for some people with less powerful CPUs. It's not really as common a problem these days. Most people have more powerful PCs. But if your CPU isn't like good enough to absolutely max out the voices on a couple of soft synths, and your DAW be able to handle that, what you can do is just simply record it at 64 and then just bounce it to audio, and then that's going to take the CPU demand off your DAW. But yeah, definitely want to bear in mind you want the max amount of voices to be 64. Obviously we want it to be polyphonic so that we can play multiple notes. And then the other important thing to mention with the unison spread, so if you've seen a lot of tutorials, you'll know that it's quite common on lead sounds and pads and stuff like that to have voices, like multiple unison voices, and then to detune them using this slider here. Now if we were making a pad sound made out of saws, we will probably detune this quite a lot. Each of the voices would be detuned a lot. It sounds like more spread out and more pad like, but because we're going something more organic that kind of resembles a real world sound, in this case strings, what we're going to do is actually have this detuned but only slightly. This makes the sound kind of more coherent and less pad like, which is what we're going for really. The next thing we're going to do is go into the oscillator section. We're going to use 3 different oscillators. Oscillator 1 and 3 are going to be the sawtooth 1 waveform, and then for oscillator 2 we're actually just going to use the sawtooth 2 waveform. It sounds slightly different to it. I think it's got like more upper harmonics or something like that. And then what we're going to do, we're actually going to leave them all the same octave, which might sound a bit weird because if you want it to be big, typically you would spread the oscillators. But what we're going to the best way to really achieve that is simply to just input a lot of octaves of MIDI notes instead. That way you'll get a much thicker sound all across the frequency spectrum, and also it allows us to create a thicker sound by only slightly detuning the oscillators from each other. So just make sure they're like no more than about 15 I forgot what it's called, 15 decibels, decimal points, like less than that, otherwise it's going to be too detuned. And then what we're going to do is actually set up a fast rate LFO. We're going to take restart off and push the X fade curve up, so we've got a sine LFO. And we're going to drag and drop this on the pitch of oscillator 2 to kind of make it a little bit of like give it a bit of a vibrato effect, which I'll just show you here. We only want it to be a little bit subtle, though. Don't want it to be too detuned and extreme. And then what we're going to do is simply dive into the filter section. We're going to use a low pass 4-pole filter. We're going to push the cutoff to around halfway. Typically you don't want the cutoff to be too high when you're trying to recreate an organic sound like this, because if you like recorded strings through some mics and through gear and stuff like that, and then you were processing them, obviously there would be tons of highs, but not as much as you would produce pushing the cutoff all the way up on some saw waves through a soft synth. So we want to reduce those highs a little bit, and the other thing we want to do to make it sound a little bit more organic is turn the resonance down. Now obviously string instruments do resonate because that's what produces the pitch that we hear, but they don't have resonance in the typical term that it would be used for in a filter in a synth. So we're going to turn this all the way down. We don't want any resonance. It's going to make it sound too kind of artificial. And then what we're going to do is set up our amplitude envelope on the filter cutoff. We're just going to move this up a little bit just to add a little bit of movement. And then to add further movement, we're going to increase the attack as well. This is basically also the amplitude envelope, of course, because it's envelope 4. And when we increase the attack, it's going to mean that the sound has a softer start to it. Obviously, string instruments, like in an orchestra, aren't the same as other instruments where the attack is instant. The movement of a string player is quite gradual, and that's kind of different to, you know, if you have someone playing like bass guitar or just a normal guitar where it's plucked and it's instant attack. This is like quite a slow attack for string instruments typically. So now we have this. We're also going to increase the release a little bit so it doesn't end so abruptly and to give it a more of a natural sound. And then what we're going to do is dive into our effects. We're first of all going to use a dimension expander. We're going to bring the size right down and put the dry wet just less than halfway. And I'll demonstrate this. This will just make it sound absolutely huge. It does exactly what it says on the tin, really. You can hear it really kind of spreads the sound out. The other thing I'm going to do is add some velocity modulation to the amplitude. The melody that I programmed in at the start has a lot of changes in velocity and a lot of velocity variation. And obviously, you know, if you were recording a real orchestra playing strings, the velocity wouldn't be the exact same every time that the orchestra played. There's going to be variation, and that's what really gives it its human feel. So this is like super important to bear in mind when you actually programming the chords themselves. Make sure you add some variations in velocity to kind of give it that like human-like feel. And then next, we're just going to add some reverb. We're going to make sure that the size is about halfway and just bring the dry wet down a little bit. Now, one thing that I'll mention here is, as I usually mention in tutorials, that you might be better off using an external reverb effect rather than Massif's inbuilt one, because most dedicated reverb VSTs are probably better than Massif's reverb. The other thing to bear in mind, which I'll just go over, is that if you want a sound like organic, then definitely have a look into getting yourself a convolution reverb plugin rather than an algorithmic reverb plugin. Convolution reverb plugins put sounds in what basically we perceive as real spaces using impulse responses that you can get anywhere on the internet, you know, from like any real world space, which is really, really cool. You can get like impulse responses for like churches and stuff like that, and theaters and like real theaters and stuff like that. So definitely have a look into that. If you use Logic, by the way, you can use Space Designer, which is Logic's reverb, which is an actual convolution reverb. If you use Ableton like me and you have Max MSP, you can get, I forgot what it's called, but there's a convolution reverb plugin you can download. And then there's one called Altiverb as well. Definitely have a look into that if you want to add some really nice organic reverb to the sound. The next thing I think I did was just boost some of the high mids using the EQ. Just to really bring out some of the high mids really. One thing I'm going to do is actually increase the size of the reverb just to put it in a bigger space and bring down the color so it's not quite as bright. That sounds much more natural to me. And that pretty much covers the sound, guys. There's another thing you could do if you are not necessarily going for a realistic sound. Adding vibrato to strings like this sounds really cool. It's typically something you'd hear in like a Nero track or something like that. I'll just quickly demonstrate. That's a pretty cool effect, and you can actually find that in the oscillator tab, of course, if the macro isn't down there. Just turn the depth up a little bit and the rate. And yeah, that pretty much covers everything to do with this sound, guys. Hopefully you found this useful. As I said, you could use it in a lot of different genres, from like dubstep to drum and bass to trance, you know, anything that you want kind of like an epic breakdown for. So that pretty much covers everything. Hopefully you found it useful. If you did, please subscribe to stay up to date with future tutorials and uploads, and also leave a like also. And yeah, if you haven't already, go ahead and check out my website over at synthhacker.com. I'll click the link in the description below to go check out my presets for NO Massive. Thanks in advance if you decide to purchase those. I think you'll find them super useful, not only just to use in your tracks, but also to reverse engineer and learn from as well. So that's all from me, guys. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.